Welcome to Lesson 2, Setting Up Scenes. We'll get started by importing a background picture, then we'll get introduced to the library and add a vehicle prop to our scene. We'll learn about parenting so that the figure moves with the vehicle, and we'll finish the scene off by understanding how lights work. I'll introduce you to the animation controls, and with just a few clicks, we'll easily animate our vehicle and figure. Finally, I'll teach you the basic concept of rendering so we can export a final image of our work. Alright, let's build our first scene. Okay, so here we are pretty much where we left off, and I want to restore Andy's figure back to its default original pose that we very first started with so we can start on a whole new idea. In the last video, we restored body parts one at a time by selecting them and then hitting restore. Now, if you want to restore the whole figure all with one click, you can go back to that edit menu, restore, and under object you'll see figure. You can restore lights, your camera, or everything in the scene all at once. I'll exit out, and I'm going to use the shortcut for figure restoration because I like shortcuts, and it's going to be Command or Control Shift F, and there he is, magically restored, even the face morphs, everything. I want to restore the camera too, and you can do that back at the restore menu or use the shortcut Command or Control Shift H, and our camera has been perfectly reset. Restoring is very helpful to get back to a firm foundation in a neutral place to start with something new. Now notice the environment we find ourselves in. It's this ground plane wall structure. Well, it's really just for reference to help you move about in 3D space when you're getting started. But when you want to work with your own backgrounds, you're going to want to know how to turn that off. We do that by going up to Display, come all the way down to Guides, and you're going to uncheck ground plane, and it goes away. You can turn it back on by going back up there into that menu and rechecking it. You can also toggle it on and off with a shortcut using Command or Control G, like so, and I'll just toggle it right back off. So we're good to go. We're nice and neutral here, and we're ready for a fresh new scene. Now, I want to bring in a background picture, and I've got this fantasy to reconstruct a Star Wars-like Jedi kind of scene. I saw the new Star Wars recently and thought it'd be fun to do for this video. So to bring in a picture, what I did is I went online, I did an image search for desert dunes, that kind of thing, saved a picture to my desktop, and so to bring it in, we go up to File, go down to Import, and the first option is Background Picture. We'll click on that, and I'll navigate to the JPEG of the desert, and it comes right in. Notice that when you bring in background pictures like that, if you rotate the camera, it stays fixed to the background. Now, the cool thing about background pictures is that it's really much like a Hollywood movie set. If you've ever seen the making of a Hollywood film, very often the actors are standing in front of a large billboard-sized matte painting of some sort of scenery, and when they look back at what they shot on camera, it looks like they were actually there, even though they were just standing in front of a picture, just like here. So we're going to pull off that same kind of trick here. Now I want to bring in a vehicle to pull off this Jedi mission Andy's going to go on. I want to direct your attention over to the right. This area here is the library. It's perhaps the heartbeat of Poser in so many ways. We're just going to introduce ourselves to it, and we're going to get into the library more fully in a later video coming up shortly. But just understand there's tons of content here. This is where all your 3D figures are located, and there are a lot of them. When you hover above these categories, you can see we've got preset poses to save us even having to do that work. You've got expressions, hair, hands. Those are hand expressions, by the way. Props like clothing and weapons, light presets, camera presets, material presets, and scenes. You want to make sure you have your first figures library selected and highlighted, and come down and uncollapse the Poser 11 content folder and go all the way down to Vehicles. And there's some pretty cool stuff in here. I want you to grab the last one at the bottom, that snub-nosed ship. It looks very Jedi-like to me, and you can either double click on it or just click and drag right into the scene. It takes just a sec to load up there, and there it is. Now, it's kind of big because it's a spaceship, so you're going to want to pull your camera out And most things in Poser come centered in perfectly on the scene, and so sometimes it'll overlap on other things like we have going on here. So what we're going to want to do is pull our camera out and raise Andy up. There's a few ways to do it. Now, we have Andy currently selected still, and we noticed before we can select body parts from the drop-down menu. We can also see that duplicate menu over here. But notice above the body parts, you have the body command here to select the entire body. And while we're up here, I'll call your attention to the figure drop-down. And now that we have more than one figure in the scene, we can see the ship and Andy right there. Now, you can also just select the body of any figure by selecting the ring around it. And if we click and drag on that ring, we can move Andy's entire body just like so. Now, I want to move him perfectly centered up on the y-axis, so I'm going to undo that and move him in a more precise way. So with the body selected, we could come to the parameters palette and drag him up with the Y-translate, but I don't see what I'm doing because he's still inside the ship. So a good way to do this is to hit M for the manipulation tool, and our graphic display for that tool shows up through all the other models in the scene. So we can hit that arrow to move up, and he's moved up perfectly. And we're going to move that other arrow to move him back in Z-axis and make him the captain of the ship. So we're looking pretty good there. I'll show you something else here. Let's explore the ship a little bit. If you select this canopy part of the ship and come over and explore its parameters, you see the open and close dial here. Remember I told you before, you want to explore your parameters, and look at that. That's a pretty cool control to have built in. So we can reframe the camera a little bit. There we go. Our scene is starting to come together. Now, let's say we want to move the ship. Hit the T for translate and just click on the ship somewhere around here. Click and drag. Notice Andy doesn't come along for the ride. Well, what we need to do is parent Andy to the ship so that whatever the ship does, all the children of the ship move along with it. In 3D, it's called the parent-child relationship, and it's very easy to set up. So to do that with figures, we're going to come up to Window and select the Hierarchy Editor, and that comes right up. We can expand our view by clicking and dragging on the bottom. And it looks a bit complicated, but we don't really need to get into all that. But what you see currently here is the entire Andy figure, and he's got a lot of body parts. You can see that here's the hip, and because the waist is a sub-tab of the hip, that means the hip is the parent to the waist, and down this cascading parent-child relationship. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the Andy figure. I'll even collapse the ship itself to keep things simple. You'll notice the eye icon here. You can hide stuff if you like and just toggle the visibility. Notice we turned our ground plane off, and so the ground plane visibility is already toggled off. Well, to set up the parent relationship here, you just simply click on Andy and then drag him into the ship. That's it. It's really that simple. So let's go ahead and let's see what we did. If we uncollapse the ship, we see Andy down at the bottom. So we can exit out. Now if we click and drag on the ship, nothing happens. Well, why is that? Let's undo. And when we selected the ship, it selected, we can see up here, the hull and not the body group. So we can select the body group by selecting the ring around it. And notice that the body is selected up here. We could have grabbed it there. Now that the body is selected and we move it using the parameters in any direction, there it is. Now Andy is moving along perfectly. If we click and drag the ring, he comes along as long as we move the body. Now we could have parented him to the hull of the ship, but by default it put it towards the body. So we're looking pretty good here. Now I want to move on and introduce you very quickly to the lighting, because I'm not convinced that Andy is in the desert. We have a very sort of indoor lighting setup going on here. And if you come over to the lighting control palette, you'll notice this big sphere, and that represents the total scene. And all the little dots around the sphere, if you click and drag and move that one in the front, these are all the lights in the scene. And when you move it, the shadows and the light updates right away for you. Now, like I said, this lighting looks a bit indoors, so I want to come over here to the parameters palette, and with the light selected, you can see that we've got light specific parameters here. I'm going to click the properties tab, and the properties is similar to parameters, but it's mostly stuff that you just toggle on and off. And the properties will be different for whatever you have selected. If it was a figure, things would be even different than what we see here. Because we have a light selected, we see that there's light specific controls. We can see that this is an area light. Now to mimic sunlight, I'm going to switch it over to an infinite light type. And we can do it just like that. And then I'm going to go back to the parameters palette. And the intensity is at 3000, which is way too much for a infinite light. So if we click on the numerical value and just enter in something like 100 and get back to something realistic, now we can slide around the 100 value, and I'm going to crank it up to around 120. I think that's going to be the best for sunlight. Now I'm going to come back over to the light controls, and notice in the image it looks like the sunlight is coming from the left side. So I'm going to click on that light and drag it towards the left, and now we're starting to look better. The only other thing I don't like is that the white has a sterile, sort of fluorescent white look to it. So let's change the color. And this dot down here, you can hover over it. Again, the tooltip at the top tells you what things are when you hover, and that's light color. If we click on it, we get this really cool RGB color picker. And as you can see, it updates right away so we can get a sense of what color. Even cooler is that you can hover over your image and sample a color from anywhere you like. I'm going to teach you a little trick. Instead of sampling something up above where the sunlight is, I'm going to come down to the sand, because this is really sort of a medium hue of the overall image. I'm going to click on the sand there, and notice it updated that color in our color picker here. I'm going to click on it one more time. And now the sliders on the left here give us white to dark values based on that original sand color. So I'm going to raise up and sample a brighter value of that original sand color, something like that. And hey, we're looking pretty good here. I don't know if it's good enough for the next Star Wars movie, but we're having fun, right? Okay, so now that we've got our lighting set up, Andy is parented, I want to quickly introduce you to the animation controls. We're going to do a whole separate video on animation more thoroughly in a later video in the series. But just really quickly, let's have a little bit of fun and just do some very simple animation, because it is very easy to do in Poser. You see at the bottom of the user interface, we've got a time slider that we could scrub through. And we've also got these video player-like controls that are pretty easy to understand. Here we've got the frame count. This is telling us we're on frame 1 of a 30 frame animation. I want you to click on 30 and change it to 90. By default, the frame rate of Poser is 30 frames per second. So by changing it to 90, that's going to make this a 3-second animation. So we're still on frame 1, and I want you to do something. I want you to click on that canopy again and close it back up. Now, let's go down to our video player controls, and you can either scrub all the way to the end, but easier thing to do is to the second button, the tooltip will tell you it's end frame. Hit that second button. And notice it automatically sent us to the 90th frame, the end of the animation. What's really cool about Poser is it automatically animates changes for you. So any changes we do on frame 90, well, Poser will automatically create all the animation between frame 1 and 90, since those were the only 2 frames that we made changes to. So let's see what that is like by clicking again on the canopy and reopening it because I want it to start closed and then end opening up, just like so. And the next thing we're going to do with the ship selected is we're going to select its body like so and come back to the parameters palette, and you see the Y rotate. Notice that it's starting at -90. I want to drag it around and do a full 360 like that, like he's about to take off on a mission. Now, because we started off at -90, a full 360 would be 270. So enter that in, and guess what? You just did your first animation in Poser with just a few clicks. We can see the results of that by coming to our player controls. Now I'm going to first hit the first frame button, and that'll take us back to the beginning of our animation, and then we can hit the play button right there. And there it is. Look at this. Andy has been knighted as a Jedi, and he's ready to take on the dark side. Pretty cool, huh? You can hit the enter button or your space bar to stop the animation, and enter does the same thing as the play button does. So you can just use the enter key and press play and stop it. Very easy stuff to do. So we've got this really cool animation going on. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the last frame of the animation by hitting the end frame. We've got this awesome 3D Jedi scene here. What if I wanted to send this to, say, J.J. Abrams and say, hey, I've got the next idea for the new Star Wars movie? Well, it would be a little weird if I sent him all this 3D stuff in a Poser file. Perhaps he has a copy of Poser. I'm not sure. I'm going to be better off if I want to share my art with the world by sending out pictures or video files. Now, I need to introduce you really quickly to the concept of rendering. To render is to basically take all the 3D scene information and then turn it into a picture or a video file that we can then take out of the program and use in the real world out there. And so to do that, it's very easy. We're currently on frame 90, and I just want to, for this video, keep the rendering very simple. We'll learn advanced rendering later, but for now, I just want to teach you the basics. And you can do that by going up to the Render tab, and just the first command is render. Go ahead and press that. Now the command shortcut for that is going to be Command or Control R, and you can see that it's calculating one part of the frame at a time, and it's taking a little bit of time to do so because it's calculating all the lights, the shadows. Now the render is going to look a little different. It's going to be better and a bit more realistic. And so you'll notice that we've got some beautiful shadows and highlights going on. Rendering is a process of trying out a render, seeing what it looks like, and then going back to the scene, making some changes, and re-rendering to see what the final output looks like. And there we have it. We've got a beautiful picture here. I think I'm ready to submit my idea to J.J. Abrams. And we notice that we've got this Render tab here. If we click on the Preview tab, that takes us back to the 3D scene. I'll click back on Render to view our picture. Now I'll click back on Preview again to illustrate this area here. This is our Recent Renders tab. If we click on that, it also takes us to our last render. Now, if we want to get this rendered picture out of the program so that we could share it with the world, there's two ways to do it. You could go to File, Export Image right there. And yet another way to do it is to simply right-click on the picture, and you can export image like so. And you got multiple file formats, PNG, JPEG, and so on. Now I'm going to cancel out and show you yet something else. Now if you're on a Mac with a single control mouse and you need to right-click, I believe it's Control-Click. However you know how to right-click on your mouse, just right-click again, and you'll notice not only can you export an image, but you can also upload to Facebook. And so multiple ways to share your artwork with the world, and who knows, maybe we'll be working with JJ. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and replay our animation. So we did some cool stuff. We did some animation, got introduced to lighting, learned about parenting, bringing in props with the library, and we know about rendering. So we can move on with some more advanced skills in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.